It all started on a sunny Tuesday morning, just like any other day. Danny was walking through the crowded hallways of Jefferson High School, juggling his books in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other. He had just stepped out of math class, ready to grab lunch. As he hurried down the hallway, something strange caught his eye. There, just a few feet ahead, was a boy who looked exactly like him. Not just a little similar. They had the same face, same messy brown hair, and even the same backpack. Danny froze in place, his heart pounding in his chest. How could this be possible? For a second, Danny thought he might be dreaming or maybe seeing things. He rubbed his eyes and blinked hard, but the boy was still there, talking to a group of friends like nothing was unusual. Danny couldn't tear his eyes away. Who was this kid? He felt like his world had flipped upside down. He had always been an only child, or so he thought. His mind raced as 1,000 questions filled his head. Danny took a deep breath, deciding to follow the boy. Maybe he could figure out what was going on. He walked slowly, trying to stay unnoticed. His mind was buzzing with thoughts. Was this some kind of joke? Was it possible they were just coincidentally alike? But the more Danny observed, the more he felt a strange connection. It was as if he were looking at a mirror version of himself, only this boy didn't seem to notice him at all. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch break, Danny watched the boy walk into a classroom. His heart raced. Should he talk to him? Should he ask if they were related? The questions were eating him alive, but he didn't know where to start. The curiosity was almost too much to handle. Danny knew he needed answers, but what if the truth was something he wasn't ready to hear? Have you ever seen someone who looked just like you, and you had no idea why? Danny was about to find out something that would change his life forever. The next day, Danny couldn't stop thinking about the boy. He didn't tell anyone, not even his mum, about the strange discovery he made in the hallway. Every time he thought about it, his stomach twisted into knots. It wasn't just the physical resemblance that bothered him, it was the feeling that something was missing. There was a mystery here, and Danny couldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. At lunch, Danny went looking for the boy again. He scanned the cafeteria nervously, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. And there he was, sitting at a table near the window, laughing with a few friends. Danny's hands felt sweaty, but he knew he couldn't just sit back and wonder forever. He had to confront him, even if it made things awkward. He took a deep breath and walked over. "Hey," Danny said, his voice shaking a little. The boy looked up, and for a split second he seemed just as surprised. They locked eyes, and Danny felt his heart skip a beat. It was like staring into his own reflection. Do I know you?" the boy asked, sounding confused.
Danny swallowed hard. "I'm not sure. But I think we need to talk." They stepped outside, away from the crowd, where it was quieter. Danny's mind was racing. He didn't know how to start this conversation. How do you even begin to ask someone why they look just like you?
"I've seen you around," Danny started. "And I know this sounds weird, but do you notice that we look exactly the same?" The boy looked at Danny closely, studying his face. "Yeah, I noticed it too. It's strange," he admitted. "I thought maybe it was just me imagining things." "What would you do if you found someone who looked exactly like you?" "Do you think we're related?" Danny blurted out, unable to hold back his thoughts any longer. The boy shrugged, looking just as lost as Danny felt. "I don't know. I mean, my name is Ben. I live with my mum. It's just been the two of us since I was little."
The moment Ben said that, Danny's heart skipped a beat. He lived with his mom too, just the two of them. Could it really be possible that, after their talk, Danny couldn't stop thinking about Ben? There were too many similarities to ignore. It was more than just a coincidence. That night, Danny sat at the dinner table with his mum, trying to act normal, but the thoughts kept swirling in his head.
"Mom," he said slowly, "is there something you haven't told me about my family?" His mum looked up from her plate, clearly surprised by the question. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Danny hesitated. He wasn't sure how to bring up the fact that he had met someone who looked just like him. "Well, do I have any other family I don't know about? Like, maybe a brother?"
His mum's face changed in an instant. It was subtle, but Danny noticed the way her eyes widened for just a second. Her fork clattered onto the plate, and she looked away, avoiding his gaze.
"Why are you asking me this, Danny?" she asked, her voice tense.
Could it be that Danny's mum was hiding something all along? The air felt thick with tension, and Danny's heart was pounding. He needed answers. "I met someone at school," Danny said carefully. "He looks exactly like me, Mom. And it's not just the way we look. There's something else. I need to know if there's something you're not telling me."
His mum stayed silent for what felt like forever. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked at Danny with tears in her eyes. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, but I didn't know how. I didn't know if you were ready to hear it."
Danny's heart sank. He could feel the weight of what was coming next. "You're not an only child, Danny," his mom whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have a twin brother." Danny sat frozen in his seat, his mind swirling with emotions. A twin brother. His whole life had been a lie, or at least not the whole truth. He had spent 16 years thinking he was an only child, only to find out that there was someone out there who shared his face, his DNA. Why had his mom kept this a secret? He could barely speak as he tried to make sense of it all. "Mum," Danny said, his voice shaking, "why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you keep this from me for so long?" His mum's eyes were filled with regret and sadness. She took a deep breath, clearly struggling with her emotions. "Danny, I never wanted to lie to you. But when you were born, things were complicated. I thought I was doing what was best for you, for both of you. Why would a mother keep such a big secret? What could be so complicated?" Danny felt his heart racing. He wanted answers, but he also wasn't sure if he was ready for what he might hear next. "Your father and I, we were young. We weren't ready for the responsibility of raising twins. We had a lot of problems, and eventually we made a choice. We thought it would be best if each of you grew up separately, without the weight of the issues we were facing."
Danny couldn't believe what he was hearing. His parents had split him and his brother up. He had spent his entire life missing someone who should have been right there with him. How could they have done this?
"I don't understand," Danny said, his voice rising. "You just gave him away."
Tears welled up in his mom's eyes as she shook her head. "No, it wasn't like that. We both loved you boys more than anything, but we thought it would be easier if we each raised one of you separately. I know now that it was a mistake. I've regretted it every day since. But we thought we were protecting you both from the chaos."
"Can you imagine living your life without knowing you had a twin?" Danny was silent, trying to process everything. He had a twin brother. His mom had kept it a secret for all these years. And now, by some strange twist of fate, they had ended up at the same school. It was almost too much to handle. "Where's Dad?" Danny asked quietly. He had never known his father. His mum had always told him that his dad had left when he was a baby, and that it was just the two of them now. But after learning about his twin, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore.
His mum sighed, wiping away a tear. Your father, he's not around anymore, Danny. We lost touch a long time ago. He was supposed to take care of Ben, but things didn't go as planned. Ben's mum, your stepmom, raised him. I haven't spoken to either of them in years.
Danny's mind raced. He felt a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. All these years he had believed he was alone with his mom. He had no idea there was a whole other life that had been kept from him. He felt betrayed, but at the same time, he understood that his mom had tried to protect him in her own way. Still, it didn't change the fact that he had missed out on something so important. A brother? An entire part of his life. The next day at school, Danny felt like he was walking through a fog. His head was spinning with everything his mum had told him. It was hard to concentrate on anything else. How could he focus on math or history when he had just discovered he had a twin brother? And now, the biggest question on his mind was how Ben would react when he found out the truth. Would Ben even want to know him? They had lived their whole lives apart, as strangers. What if Ben was angry that their parents had split them up? What if he didn't want to be a part of Danny's life? The thought made Danny's stomach turn.
By lunchtime, Danny decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to talk to Ben, even if it meant things might get messy. He walked nervously through the halls, scanning the cafeteria for Ben's familiar face. There he was, sitting with his usual group of friends. Danny's heart pounded as he made his way over, but he didn't stop this time. Ben, Danny said, his voice shaky but determined.
Ben looked up, confused at first, but then his expression changed when he saw the serious look on Danny's face. Hey, what's up?
I need to talk to you, Danny said, his throat dry. It's important. Ben stood up, sensing that something was off. They walked to a quieter part of the school, away from the noise of the cafeteria. Danny could feel his pulse in his ears. This was it. This was the moment everything could change. I talked to my mum last night, Danny started, trying to keep his voice steady. She told me something that I think you need to know too. Ben frowned, clearly not understanding where this was going. What are you talking about?
I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to come out with it, Danny said, his voice breaking slightly. You and I, we're twins. We're brothers, Ben.
Ben stared at him, his face blank with shock. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence felt heavy, like it could swallow them whole. Danny's heart pounded, waiting for Ben's reaction. What would you do if you found out you had a twin you never knew existed? Would Ben be happy, angry, confused?
Ben blinked, still processing what he had just heard. What? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Are you serious?
Danny nodded. Yeah. I know it's a lot to take in. I didn't know either until last night. Our parents, they kept us apart.
Ben stood there, silent, his face pale as he tried to understand. The weight of the truth seemed to hit him all at once, and for a moment Danny thought he might say something. But instead, Ben just turned and walked away, leaving Danny standing there alone.
The days that followed were some of the hardest Danny had ever faced. After dropping the bombshell on Ben, his brother had walked away, and they hadn't spoken since. The silence was deafening. Every day Danny went to school hoping that Ben would come up to him, say something, anything. But Ben kept his distance, as if pretending that the truth didn't exist would make it go away. Danny couldn't blame him. How do you come to terms with something like that? He knew Ben needed time to process, but it didn't make the waiting any easier. Each day that passed felt heavier than the last. Would they ever talk again? Would they ever get the chance to be brothers like they were supposed to? At home, Danny's mum could sense that something was wrong. She had expected that the truth would be hard to hear, but she hadn't anticipated the silence that followed. "Have you talked to him yet?" she asked one evening as they sat down for dinner. Danny shook his head, pushing his food around on his plate. "He won't talk to me. He just walked away." His mum sighed, sadness washing over her face. "I'm sorry, Danny. I know this is hard, but you have to give him time. It's not an easy thing to hear. He's probably as confused as you were." Can a relationship that's been hidden for years ever really heal? Danny knew she was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. He had spent his whole life not knowing he had a brother, and now that he did, it felt like they were even further apart than before. The days dragged on, each one more painful than the last. Every time Danny passed Ben in the hallway, it felt like a punch to the gut. Ben wouldn't even look at him. It was like he had vanished into a world where Danny didn't exist. How could someone so close, someone who was his own flesh and blood, feel so far away? At night, Danny lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying their brief conversation over and over in his mind. What had he done wrong? Was there something more he should have said? Was there some way he could have made Ben stay and talk instead of walking away? The silence felt like a prison, locking him in a cage of doubt and regret. He started to wonder if maybe they were never meant to be brothers. Maybe their parents had been right to keep them apart. But that thought only made the pain worse. Was it too late? Could they ever really be a family? One night, Danny couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his phone and stared at Ben's number, his fingers hovering over the screen. Should he call him? What if Ben didn't want to talk? But the thought of staying silent felt even worse. He needed to try, even if it meant getting hurt again. With a shaky breath, Danny typed out a message. "I'm sorry about everything. I just want to talk. Please, can we meet?" He stared at the screen for what felt like forever, his heart racing as he waited for a response. But none came. The screen stayed dark. Danny felt his chest tighten with disappointment. Would Ben ever forgive him? Would they ever be able to sit down like brothers, like family, and talk about everything that had happened? A week passed, and Danny started to lose hope. Ben hadn't responded to his message, and it seemed like their chance to connect was slipping away. But then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Danny was sitting in the library trying to focus on his homework when his phone buzzed. It was Ben. Danny's heart skipped a beat as he opened the message. "I'm ready to talk. Meet me at the park after school." His hands shook as he read the words. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. But now that it was finally happening, he felt a wave of nerves wash over him. What would he say? How could he explain everything in a way that would make sense to Ben? The hours until the end of the school day felt like an eternity. When the final bell rang, Danny practically ran to the park, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment that could change everything. When he arrived, he saw Ben sitting on a bench under a tree, his face serious and unreadable. Danny's stomach churned with nerves. He didn't know what to expect: anger, sadness, or maybe even rejection. But he knew he had to face it. "Hey," Danny said quietly as he approached. Ben looked up, his expression softening a little. Hey. For a moment they just stood there in awkward silence, neither of them knowing what to say. The weight of everything they hadn't said hung between them, thick like fog. But Danny knew he couldn't let the silence stretch on any longer. "I'm really sorry," Danny started, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to throw everything at you like that. I didn't know how else to tell you. I didn't even know until my mom told me. I've been trying to figure it all out, just like you." Ben looked down at his hands, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Danny thought maybe he wouldn't respond. But then Ben spoke, his voice quiet but full of emotion. "I was angry. I still am, I guess. Not at you, but at them, at our parents. They took everything from us, Danny. They took away all those years we could have had together."
Can you imagine finding out you missed your whole life with your own brother? Danny felt a lump form in his throat. Ben's words cut deep because he knew they were true. Their parents had made choices that had torn them apart before they even had a chance to know each other. "I know," Danny said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm angry too, but I don't want to let that stop us from being brothers now. We can't change what happened, but we can choose what we do from here." Ben looked at him, and for the first time, Danny saw something other than hurt and anger in his eyes. There was a glimmer of hope. Could they really start over? Could they build a relationship despite all the years they had lost? "I don't know if it's that simple," Ben said after a long pause. "I've spent my whole life not knowing you, Danny. It's hard to just flip a switch and act like we're brothers now." "I get that," Danny replied, his voice gentle. "But we don't have to figure it all out right now. We can take it one step at a time. I just want to get to know you, Ben. I want to be part of your life." There was a long silence. Ben looked away, his jaw tight as he wrestled with his emotions. This was the moment. Danny could feel it in his bones. Everything depended on what Ben would say next.
Finally, Ben let out a long breath and nodded. "Okay, we can try." Will they really be able to rebuild a relationship after all this time? Danny's heart swelled with relief. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, and that was all he could ask for. They sat there in the park for hours, talking about everything and nothing. They talked about school, about their lives growing up, about the things they liked and the things they didn't. For the first time, Danny felt like he was getting to know his brother. It wasn't easy. There were still so many unanswered questions, so much pain from the past. But as the sun began to set and they stood up to leave, Danny felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had found each other, and no matter what happened next, they were brothers. That was something no one could ever take away from them. As they walked away from the park, Ben turned to Danny and smiled. A real smile, not the forced one he had given him before. "Maybe this won't be so bad after all," he said, his tone lighter than it had been in days. Danny grinned. "Yeah, maybe not. Sometimes the hardest things lead to the greatest rewards." They still had a long way to go, but for the first time in weeks, Danny felt hopeful. They had lost so much time, but now they had a future. And that future, no matter how uncertain, was something they could build together.